So again, thanks a lot, Usman. I know you're a very busy person, what with Modash and all the SEO consulting going on. Really appreciate you taking the time out for this.
Oh, of course. Thank you
Yeah,
so much, Junaid. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking on LinkedIn, just catching up. So, yeah, looking forward to the chat.
likewise. And for those who perhaps are living under a rock, who is Usman Akram? What does he do?
I'll give a quick intro. It's pretty simple. I'm an organic growth strategist. I work with B2B SaaS companies. I help them grow using organic search and AI search. So just helping them make more money through Google and LLMs, pretty much. I'm currently leading the discoverability function, which is how we define at Modash is basically the nexus of SEO, AEO, and paid search. Modash is an eight-figure B2B SaaS company in the influencer marketing space, and I'm leading, all things search there. Um, Apart from that, I work with other companies who need consulting help, again, in the B2B SaaS category, typically Series A. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's cool, man. That's really cool. And how has the life going as an in-house strategist? I know you've been majorly on the agency side for the last 3 to 4 years. So has this been a big shift? Has it been very natural?
Yeah, no, to be honest, it has been a pretty big change. Um, so for I think the last 3 to 4 years, I have been working in an agency setting. Um, First it was Flying Cat, and then Triple Dart, and then Omniscient. And to be honest, it was more of a deliberate move at the start. I wanted to just gain more breadth of experience working with a set of different companies at the same time. And I just thought that would be a good way to learn the patterns and the playbooks that are necessary to win in search. And that was a good move until at some point I just wanted my life to calm down a little bit, and I wanted to reduce the number of meetings that I do on a weekly basis. So I just thought maybe this is the time to go in house. I was looking at a bunch of different opportunities, and then Modash was one of my consulting clients back from, I think, 2024 most likely. So we just hit the right time, and it was like, hey, let's chat and figure out if we can potentially work together. But yeah, I was pretty clear that working in house is going to be something that I want to dive into now at this point in my career. Just having one project that I can give complete attention to. And it has been amazing because right now, the number of calls that I take on a weekly basis had just gone down drastically, which is amazing. Um, and that just leaves more time to focus, more time for deep work. And that's the kind of things, to be honest, that I enjoy the most these days. So I'm working on some cool projects, which I think I wouldn't have the chance to work with um, if I was still working in an agency, right? You're limited by a scope. You have to do what the client says up to some extent. Even if you have the ownership of the strategy, there's still a level of just at the end getting done what the client is desiring. uh, when I'm working in-house, I just have way more control, way more ownership, and it's just a totally different experience. So yeah, I'm actually totally loving it so far.
But it has still been hectic, right? What used to be, let's say, meetings with clients have been replaced by other work. So the research that you've been doing, which we'll dive into later in this call. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the number of working hours, to be honest, and the level of effort that I put into anything has not gone down. And again, that is fine with me. That was never the goal, to not work harder. It was only to just reduce the level of interaction that is required. And you work in an agency, of course, so you know how, for example, on a weekly basis, it's like, it's not even just the meetings. It's like on a random Tuesday, client will message and say, hey, what do you think about this? And you have to get back to them. And you have to you totally reshuffle the priorities, because one single
that's true.
reply might take like 30 minutes of your analysis, looking at the SERPs or whatever have you. So it was like, all of these spontaneous things. I remember when I joined Modash, I think it was like maybe the third or fourth week, and our CEO was curious about something in GA4 data. So he just, posted a screenshot. And Every is great. Our CEO is amazing. He just posted about something that he inquired about, and I was like, I'll get back to you. And that took away, I think, maybe one complete hour in back and forth exchange. And then a few days later, I was chatting with my manager, and he was like, Ryan, he was like, I'm pretty sure got reminded of the agency days by this experience, right? Because this is something that you used to do on a daily basis so many times. So again, like all in all, it's pretty much like you just have more time to focus. You still are working on the same level of, like, the magnitude of effort is the same. It's just that the things that drain you have been removed out of your schedule, and it's replaced with the things that actually give you energy. So you don't mind working harder, in those kind of settings. And again, like, to be honest, I'm not necessarily against like working with agencies. I would still go back to an agency world if the time is right. It's just that at this point I was like, I can just make so much impact working with one single company compared to, let's say, leading strategies for 6 to 7 different clients, again, at this point in my career, right? So yeah.
Yeah, different priorities, different stage of the career. Some might still prefer working in an agency. People that still need to gain more experience, while others would prefer being in house. So
Exactly.
yeah, and yep, it is hectic, but like you said, at that point in my stage where I think I need to get that more experience, need to work with a lot of brands, learn how things work across different verticals, which is why I am in an agency right now. So yeah, I can totally relate to that. Speaking of your work in Modash, you mentioned you're the discoverability lead working at the nexus of SEO, AI search, and paid, but you never post about the paid side of things, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
Is there a particular reason for that?
Not a strong reason, other than the fact that so far I simply haven't had the chance to dive super deep into it. It's definitely a new territory compared to where my absolute zone of genius is. So, and that was, to be honest, again, part of the reason why I wanted to join Modash. That it's, something new in the mix. It's not just organic, but also, some level of managing paid. Plus, the responsibilities keeps growing over time. So, like, right now, I have two folks in my team. When I joined, I was solo, so I'm already technically a manager. But yeah, so far I think we just had so much to fix and optimize and improve, from an SEO and AEO standpoint, because there was no owner, for those two channels when I joined full time, right? So Ryan, who's our manager, head of marketing, was still leading both of those two initiatives himself. So there was just like so many opportunities on the table that we said we're not going to focus on optimizing or getting the most out of paid search at this point. We're actually still working with a consultant, who so far has helped with, I think, LinkedIn ads and a couple of other things. Most likely some level of optimization for paid search as well. But I think just starting from June, July is the time when I've started digging deep into what else can we do here. So yeah, so far we haven't done much, and that's why I haven't talked a lot about it. But I think in the next few weeks or months, you'll definitely start hearing more from me. And I'm really excited about seeing how, for example, we can merge the organic and paid side, because essentially both are search as a medium, right? So for example, recently when I just started looking into some of the data, I was really, really curious about some tests that we can run on the paid search. So as an example, it's like, I'm definitely sure there are keywords where we're already ranking number one. We have like AI overviews, and yet we're running paid search ads. So maybe we can test pausing some of those campaigns and see what happens. Because if we're right, technically speaking, all of that traffic should still go to organic listings, and we should be able to test that, verify that within Google Search Console against certain queries. If we see an uplift in clicks, around the same time when we stop a campaign for which we're already organically ranking, that would be interesting to see, right? So yeah, so it's just, again, just like super early for me. I have been here for a good number of months, but again, like, there was so much to fix, so much to optimize, so much to expand on the organic side, that I simply hadn't had the chance to look into the paid search one.
I understand, and that's insightful. So, just to dig a little bit into what you said right now, some would think that having as much real estate on the SERP would be beneficial. So, for example, if you're appearing in the AI overviews, you have a good organic listing. At the same time, you can also run ads. So, just so you can grab more of that real estate on the SERP rather than pausing ads, just see if you can get more clicks organically. What would you say about that hypothesis?
I Yeah, so I pretty much think in the same exact logic. It's just that there's a really nice analogy, I think, shared by Rand Fishkin, where he was like, sometimes the folks who are going to get in the door using organic search listings, whatever, maybe 10 ranking lists or maybe AI reviews, whatever, um, you just get to a point where you're cannibalizing traffic between paid and organic, and that can happen. So I think there was an analogy that he shared, and he was like, imagine that you hired a guy for a restaurant that you run, who whose job is to just hand brochures to the people around the corner of the street, right? For your restaurant. And you're trying to just, like, hey, I've hired you. All you have to do is promote my restaurant by handing all of these brochures. And then at some point, you're like, oh, a lot of people are coming into the restaurant with the brochures in their hand. Right. So most likely this program is working. But maybe the guys handing those brochures to the folks who are already going to walk into the restaurant. you know. So it's hard to say how how effective the campaign is if it's still just landing to the folks who already are aware of the brand. They're going to get to the top few ranking results, because again, like if you think about, for example, someone searching like influencer search tool, right, and they see a couple of ads at the top, and then they see number one ranking for Modash organically, we wouldn't know if that person was aware of Modash as a brand or not. So maybe they just see Modash ranking number one, and they would be like, I'm going past all of the ads, even if Modash is not bidding on those keywords, and just click on this listing simply because I have an affinity with the brand based on past marketing and touch points I've experienced. And to be honest, I even think about this even in traditional SEO rankings. I'm of the opinion that if you just do things right in the B2B world, someone will pick your company ranking on number 4 for a particular keyword that they care about over companies ranking number 1, simply because you've built a brand and they recognize it, they have an affinity towards it. And I'm pretty sure you do something like this already. So for example, if you search for something like maybe, if you want to dive into things that folks have done using Claude Code, and you're already following a couple of people, maybe Ryan Law and a few others, you'll search for something in Google, and then you'll specifically look for content published by them. And you don't necessarily care about rankings in that instance. You care about trust, right? The folks who actually have built a brand and build resonance with you. So I think about it in the same way for paid search, and it's just a test worth running. I know, again, there's a risk of, like, hey, we might lose some real estate, but it's definitely something that you should try.
I understand. Yep. Testing is key. So another counterpoint that I had was that if they know enough about your brand, they might just search about you directly, land directly on your website, any other direct way instead of searching a category defining keyword. So again, I'm of that viewpoint.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
then again, anything, like most of the things in search, it should be tested.
yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, we're just guessing.
Yeah, no,
And
I think you're right. My last counterpoint would be that in my view, trust is more of a continuum on a spectrum rather than an absolute. So I wouldn't say there are folks who are totally unaware of Modash, and then there are folks who would just get to the website by searching the brand name. It's all on a spectrum where there are folks who are still searching with a keyword, they're open to considerations, but they still have, some recognition about a brand, etc. So I'm trying to win all of them, where even if someone searches with a non-branded keyword, I want them to see Modash and then potentially save some money by not running ads on some of the keywords that we're already ranking for organically, and still getting them to the website. So yeah, I think what I think about it is like it's on a spectrum somewhere, and we want to capture the entire market. But I understand your point, of course, and I'm still of the same view. That's exactly why I think about for 70% of the keywords where we're still bidding and we're seeing a result from conversion standpoint and traffic, we're deciding to not completely revamp the strategy. So yeah,
fair enough. And I think this warrants a separate discussion of its own.
yeah, sure.
But let's dive into something that you do love and something that you are working with a lot, which is AI search, right? What would you say is or are some of the things that companies are doing incorrectly when it comes to AI search now, even with all of the awareness that they have about how the platforms work?
To be honest, a ton of things, starting with the mental models that they have around AI search are fundamentally wrong for the most part. And it might not be as obvious to some of the folks in the industry who are actually, good at optimizing for AI search or thinking about it right from a, brand positioning standpoint and things like that. But for a majority of the companies, they're still just using the same traditional mental models of, traditional SEO onto this channel, which means that they're constantly trying to figure out how much traffic can we drive from AI search and, things like that. And they're not necessarily thinking about it like from a brand visibility standpoint. So that's number one. Secondly, about there's an entire ocean of optimization strategies where companies um, just don't get the weightage of different factors accurately. What I mean by that is, and it's pretty much the same thing that I also see with SEO sometimes, which is like, anyone getting started with SEO would be like, hey, we need to work on these 200, 300 ranking factors. What they fundamentally don't understand is that there is a difference in the weightage of each of the ranking factors. There are things that are super, super important and things that are just like, best practices, which you can totally ignore. So in the same way, I think with AI search, they say, oh, what's important is readability and a couple of other things. But then again, there are things that are cherry on top, and then there are things which are actually, building the foundations. Now, what happens to be the case is that most of the stuff that builds the foundations for AI search optimization is the stuff that is hard to fake. So it's like, do you have really accurate brand
Brand
and company?
reputation,
Yeah,
reviews.
exactly. And that's what makes it harder. So I still think there's a decent level of overlap with traditional SEO, of course. We see it all the time. And at the same time, I think it's a totally different category. So we need to think about some unique practices that only apply to AI search. But again, the things that are hard to fake are things that you do to just build a really good company. So just making sure that you have a brand footprint that is consistent with the kind of positioning that you want on the web. I search would care more about how the web is talking about you rather than your own website, compared to how Google was, of course. And then there are some technical things. AI search just does not use page rank as a technology. They rely more on vectors and their context with each other. For Google, they still rely on page rank, which is a very old technology but still in use for backlinks and authority building. So all of these things. And then I think on top of it, at the end, even measurement is a problem for companies to wrap their head around with AI search. So it's problems all across, to be honest, which is like, how do we think about how to, like, what is fundamentally different between AI and traditional search? How do we optimize for it? So there are practices that they just they don't wrap their head around it accurately. And then lastly, there's also measurement problems, which is that there's a whole different set of measurement practices that you have to absorb in order to better understand how this channel works. So again, they would be thinking more in the case of like, hey, rankings in AI search, which simply does not make sense to me. They would be curious about how many conversions were attributed to LLMs and GA4 directly, which again is like pretty hard to understand. So all of these things across the board, to be honest, are things that I just feel like companies are not getting right.
No, true. That's true. I think I saw a piece of research recently where there was data on how people search. Basically, how do they combine AI search and traditional search? So, certain percentage of them, I think around 30 to 40, start their initial research on an AI tool, and then they go and confirm whatever information that they received through organic search. And similarly, there's also a certain group that starts their research on SEO channels, organic search, and then they go on AI tools to confirm that. Some only search on AI, some only search on SEO, but that is a small percentage of the people tested. So that I think ties into how they are thinking of it in very narrow terms, and especially in the attribution sense. Because if I'm searching something on ChatGPT, I find a brand, I go and then Google it, and then I visit that site. Most likely that conversion will be tracked to organic or maybe even direct. And even though AI search played a big part in driving that conversion, you won't see that attribution in any traditional attribution tools.
Exactly as it is. I think there are two really interesting pieces of research. One by Winter, which is like their annual survey that they run with CMOs on how they buy software, and they found some really interesting things in it around AI search specifically. And anyone who is currently underestimating the value and magnitude of impact that AI search drives in vendor evaluation at large, not just software but any vendor, um, should look at that research, because that just highlights year over year how things have changed. So Winter runs the same survey, same set of questions every single year, and it's an annual survey report that you can look at, which means that you can compare the deltas. I made a video about it, and looks like the trend of using AI for evaluation for discovery is just like skyrocketing on a year over year basis. We're still caught up in the search share of Google versus ChatGPT and stuff, but what people don't understand is the level of attachment they have with LLMs and the level of specificity they can play with when using LLMs like ChatGPT and Claude. So yeah, so I think that's like totally different experience. The second research would be by Omniscient, and I think this was released when I was still there, where we looked at how B2B buyers are using LLMs, and what are some of the use cases and how they interact with it and all of that stuff. And again, it just confirmed that majority of folks are, exactly as you said, discovering platforms through AI search, and then they might not buy directly, but at some point they're going to Google the brand because they just learned about the company through an LLM in the first place. So who do you credit in this case, right? An LLM who made the discovery, or the
Exactly.
channel who captured the demand? So in fact, like just yesterday, I was looking at some of the self-reported attribution data of Modash, and we noticed that again, the data could be flawed a little bit, right? But LLMs in that set of 300 plus self-reported attributions of conversions that we had was higher. The share of LLMs was higher than Google, so a little higher than Google, which is interesting. Again, it could be a little flawed, right?
And you
It's
wouldn't
hard to
see
say.
that with a tool.
Yeah,
Flawed, of
you
course,
wouldn't see it.
because
Yeah,
memory imperfections and all that.
exactly. And again, like, I'm pretty sure that there's some level of, just like data being skewed. But at the same time, it's directionally accurate that we can see how big AI search is, how important LLMs are. And even if I just directly look at inside GA4 or HubSpot, the share of conversions attributed to LLMs is just like minuscule compared to what I'm seeing in self-reported attribution. So yeah, so I think the magnitude is pretty big.
Would you say it is important for all types of businesses right now? Because, like you said, in an agency, you're working with a lot of clients. Whenever I'm onboarding clients, obviously, one of the things that I have to do is see how viable AI search would be for them. And I think that is still sort of a black box, right? We can't measure the, let's say, viability of AI search as we can with normal SEO, right? We can go on a few search tools, Ahrefs, we can type in a few keywords related to a business, get an idea of their TM. But with AI search, it's not that easy. So how do we
Yeah.
figure out if it's worthwhile going after?
Yeah, I think really good questions. So I used to think about this differently maybe a year back, where I was like, not all businesses need to think about AI search. It's still a tech thing and stuff like that. But at this point, the numbers are pretty huge in terms of usage for, let's say, ChatGPT, which has the highest share of LLMs at this point. So to be honest, at this point, I'm more inclined towards just recommending it to every brand. I would just add the caveat that if you work on AI search optimization, you should still start with, traditional SEO, because, um, if we're running the assumption that there's potential in AI search, it just automatically means that there's a 10 times bigger, if not maybe 10 times, 5 times bigger potential in Google. So if you're not doing any marketing, of course, AI search is not the only thing that you should be working on. You should first start with Google and other mediums. But should AI search be in the mix? Definitely, somewhere. Now, I think I've seen people, for example, folks like Rand Fishkin, talk about how people should use tools like SparkToro to check where their audience is, right? And that might be a good approach, just to check, like, my audience actually using more of these frontier models versus, for example, a magazine, or maybe following a specific YouTube channel. So he was thinking about it broadly, very holistically. And then you should decide whether AI search optimization versus any other campaign is worth my time. I think about it a little differently, because when you are using a tool like SparkToro or any others, which are amazing tools, by the way, right? You're still looking at a number, and you have to throw into the fact that the attachment of a user with a particular product needs to be contextualized in this scenario. Meaning, if I am paying a lot of attention to New York Times as a magazine, and I read it as a newspaper website, sure, my usage might be higher with New York Times because I'm in my 40s or whatever, right? But and maybe even higher than LLMs, maybe even higher than ChatGPT. But when I'm talking with ChatGPT, I'm just like way more specific. I can ask questions. I can do a lot more things which any magazine simply cannot offer to me. So in that case, I would say, even if the usage numbers are a little down for your audience, the level of attachment and specificity and just like context that you can give to an LLM is just like way too much. So if you see in a tool that, hey, Junaid uses ChatGPT 20% of the times, but then he reads this particular blog about like 50% of the time, I would still make the case that ChatGPT optimization would be way more important to capture Junaid's just like purchase behavior. So yeah, so I think there's some level of a caveat that you have to understand, that it's not just all quantitative when you're thinking about where your audience hangs out, but also how strongly do they think about a particular tool that they use in order to search information. So that's number one. And then secondly, of course, in terms of TAM analysis, again, it's hard to say. I used to do TAM analysis and like just figuring out what's the total search market that we can capture for any company when we were still optimizing only for Google. And I thought that was a really useful exercise. Fundamentally, I feel like it's not as useful when it comes to AI search, even if you can do it. So I definitely think it's possible, right? Like, where you're directionally getting some data, and it's pretty easy. Like, for example, it's not as hard as people think. There are two main problems, right? One is if we don't have volume data. That's number one. And then second one is that we don't have CTR data, because essentially, even if you're forecasting for SEO in the traditional sense, you're running some statistical models on CTR assumptions and ranking wins assumptions, like, hey, maybe we can rank X percentage of the time for this corpus of keywords that we've researched. You can apply the same exact logic to LLMs, where you say, I need volume numbers, first of all, which you can estimate by saying, hey, generally speaking, correlation between traditional search and AI search for my audience based on maybe GA4 data is anywhere between, maybe let's say 90% to 10%, right? 90% of the traffic comes from Google, 10% comes from AI search. Now, if I have a massive corpus of keywords for Google, right? And I have volume numbers for those. Maybe I can take 10% of those and apply them to AI search and say like, hey, this 10% is what my audience is searching in terms of quantity. So if you have like maybe 10 million total searches to optimize for inside Google, maybe it's like, 1 million of those could be 1 million. Yes, 1 million could be like AI search. Again, like very, very raw, not accurate, but directionally true. And then you can say, hey, in terms of CTR, we have some data, for example, Ahrefs compared the CTR differences between AI search versus Google rankings, and they noticed that Google has about 96% higher CTR value, which is like if you rank number one for Google, rank number one in AI recommendation, you're going to get 96 times more clicks simply because AI search is not designed to send you clicks, right? By mechanics. So again, you can say, okay, so, we're going to get maybe 4% of the clicks that we usually get when we rank number one in Google. So the CTR is super, super low. The volume is about 1/10, and then we can run some assumptions pretty much the same way that we used to do with Google, right? So we have a total set of volume that we've gathered, again assumed, and then we have a CTR that we've again assumed based on industry benchmarks. So I think that would be the way to do it. Another way could be to just use, for example, prompt volume given by companies like Profound, which is again like it's hard to say. It's not going to be super accurate because essentially it's
And
statistical
expensive.
modeling. Yeah, expensive. It's essentially statistical modeling. They have all of their customers. They have their prompts. They can look at how many times certain prompts are getting hit, and then they can um, just forecast and extrapolate that data to say, oh, so inside project management, we think these prompts are getting searched for X number of times. So it's still just like a forecast in terms of volume, and then you're also forecasting on a variety of different things. I think of forecasting or modeling, whatever we want to call it, um, like it's never going to be perfect, and it does not need to be perfect. It just needs to be directionally true. There's a really good quote by this statistician, George Box. I think his maybe French or maybe English. I'm not sure, but he has a really good quote, and he says all models are wrong, but some are useful. So essentially, every single statistical modeling forecasting methodology that you're using is technically flawed at some point, right? You can definitely find a ton of flaws in every single methodology or approach that you're using. You're just trying to make it useful for a particular decision that you want to make. So in that sense, I think yes, you can make it work with AI search. Would I do it for any client that I'm working with? Not necessarily. I just don't think it's so useful at this point when a channel is simply not designed to send you traffic in the first place.
So we look at different things, right? How many times they are mentioned for a specific set of keywords? How many times are they being cited? Are they being perceived properly? What is the sentiment with their brand? Negative, positive? Do they need to work on that? So this brings it back to what you said at the start about how they need to change their mindset in terms of what they're measuring. It's not about clicks and everything. It's about measuring the right things.
Exactly, 100%. We're just in a different um, era of marketing, I believe, right, with AI search. And I, to be honest, in my opinion, I just feel like over time, traffic as a core metric will just continue to lose its traffic at some point. Maybe people will still be getting to the home pages of the website, but I just don't believe we'll continue to live in a world where we're interested in how many blog visits one of our informational blog posts got. So it's like, I find it really interesting how B2C world operates in certain practices around marketing. So for example, they would run a billboard ad as a company, and they would be like, oh, so we ran this billboard ad, so we like did some stuff, and then this happened, and maybe you can just correlate it, right? So they're not necessarily saying, oh, do we have this billboard on this street, and then is one of our retail stores in the street actually getting more purchases? That's not happening because the billboard is there for brand recall. So it's pretty hard to measure, but they will continue to invest more in it because they just know it directionally works. I think about it in the same way with B2B, and that's where, in my opinion, we're moving, where tracking is getting more and more vague, less accurate, and we still have to make decisions, which means more of our decisions over the next few years will become gut based, instinct based rather than data based, which is fine, to be honest, which is just the world that we're moving towards.
Definitely true. One of my hypotheses about how this is all going to develop, it might sound a bit bleak, but over time, throughout its history, humanity has moved towards making things as simple and efficient as possible, right? So from the advent of carts to trains, to airplanes. So why should it not apply to internet and how we consume information? I can totally see a future where people might not visit any website at all. They might not open their mobile, type in a certain keyword, and visit a site to do a purchase. They might even just think about it, or they might just say to their AI assistant, hey, I want this, this, and this, which is already happening. People are moving towards that purchasing behavior. So human traffic might decline, it might even become zero. But that other type of traffic, the bot traffic, agentic traffic, that is something that
Very true.
that we'll all need to prepare for. How
100%.
do we measure that? How do we show up for those type of bots? And I wanted to ask you about this specifically, the rollout of agentic protocols, especially useful for e-commerce sites. How do you think it is currently affecting the B2B side of things, if it is?
I think it's a new market for sure. As in, I definitely think there's potential where agents will be looking at your website, and which means we as strategists should be looking at constantly, not constantly, but up to some extent, crawl logs and Cloudflare data and stuff like that. Um, I feel like it's still in the early stages, but there's definitely a spike with, for example, us just using more of MCPs. And I just recently got in touch with someone over LinkedIn who is I think running or just started running a company that helps your brand gets more mentions and higher visibility within the MCP browsers of specific LLMs. It's not necessarily AI search optimization. It's more like, we help your
Agentic.
MCP. Yeah, totally agentic. So, which is like super small right now, but I definitely see it becoming a market of some sort. So I'm already seeing some early players in it. I think if you want to follow some folks who are talking more about it, Suganthan is amazing at this stuff.
Definitely.
He,
Yep.
yeah. So yeah, but I think it's super early at this point. But when you see some infrastructure getting built around stuff which is new as a technology, for example, Google releasing its agentic analysis tool inside Lighthouse and other things, um, you can definitely forecast it becoming something serious in the next few weeks or years. Plus, you can also just look at your own behavior, right? So, for example, I am using a ton of MCPs, which means my usage of those tools directly without LLM as a bridge is constantly going down. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a thing. It's just not, again, in terms of volume, that big right now, but the trend is definitely going there.
And you said about how we're, as SEOs, using a lot of MCPs and AI tools. Even if we extrapolate that to non-technical people, the usage of LLMs is increasing there. Even if we look around ourselves at our friends and everything, even if they're not that educated about how AI works, they're still saying a chat GPT this, a chat GPT that. And it's just a more efficient way of getting information. So even though as SEOs, a lot of times we like to blame Google and other companies about taking traffic away from us, it is the natural evolution,
100%,
getting
100%.
information more
Yeah,
efficiently.
and we can already see, like, a lot of conversions happening with, we spoke about Lighthouse, for example, and then Google also released their agentic search, which is like, you can run agents to do the search for you and get things ready for your review, maybe in a few minutes or whatever time period you're looking at. Um, and then you also have all of these individual companies becoming agents for you to go ahead and do things using web search as a tool. And that's why inside Search Console, you will consistently see a ton of weird searches, spiking up impressions already. So it seems like it's, the same thing that we experienced when ChatGPT was newly released, right? Everyone said it could become a thing where we're optimizing for these LLMs. And some people were skeptical. Some people were like, hey, Google is too dominant. But it looks like it's the same pattern with MCPs and just, agents becoming traffic for you. So, and it's pretty so funny. I think at some point, just like, maybe 5 years back, we were at a point where companies would be blocking bots from scraping their website, and now they're optimizing for bots, which is like so crazy to think about. Yeah, just a different world that we live in.
I wanted to ask something specific. So without giving too much away, without giving away the secrets, is there something that Modash is doing uniquely with AI search, or something that you are personally?
I'm not sure if there's any uniqueness, to be honest. We have done a lot of crazy things, like, I wouldn't say crazy, but something that wouldn't apply typically to organic search. So for example, I think back in the days, when we were still trying to, and this was before I joined, there was this keyword called fake followers check, which is still one of our biggest keywords if you check Modash traffic. And we have a page where you can check the fake followers of a particular user account on Instagram or any other platform. And it was super, super competitive. It is still super competitive. If you just rank one spot higher, you're going to add tons of traffic. So I remember Ryan at some point just like hired a bunch of creators on TikTok, and they would create videos like, hey, here's how you can check the number of fake followers Ronaldo has or Messi has, or Donald Trump, and they would literally on the screen show that, hey, type this in Google, go to this page on Modash, and then search whatever you want to search. Um, if that video by some of those creators, and some of those creators actually posted it and it went super, super viral, like millions of views. This was still like maybe 1 or 2 years back, but that set the foundation, because essentially in the video it was asking, the video and the creator was basically asking the folks to search for a particular keyword and then choose Modash specifically, even if it's not ranking number one. So they would look at the brand name in the SERPs, intentionally click on it, and as a result, looking at click-through data, Google would just put us in the number 1 or 2 spots. So, because everyone was choosing Modash, it felt like, oh, there's something there, So that was quite interesting. Other than that, I think right now, when it comes to AI search, we're benefiting a lot from just good marketing that the company has done for a very long time. So, if, for example, at this point, it's just so easy to dominate our industry with Modash as a company, because we have literally a massive team of marketers who are fully focused on getting things right. So, for example, we have folks who are doing original research around influencer marketing. So, yeah, there are so many surveys and unique data about influencer marketing managers' jobs and salaries, and maybe how much to charge for a single post, all of those kind of things. So, we're trying to answer as many questions as possible, even if it's not a piece of content that is optimized for search. And AI search loves those kind of things because you become the source of that material. And then there's brand marketing, which is again an entire team. We have a ton of content going on YouTube and TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram, etc. From the Modash account. There's a lot of digital PR that we have. There's a lot of brand recognition in general on the web. So especially in Europe, but now also inside US. So we're constantly tracking, for example, the search volume of the brand name against different competitors, and we're constantly dominating. Every quarter, every 3 months, 4 months, the search volume is growing, which just means high demand. So all of it converges to a point where we're just like super, super dominant inside AI search. That's where, in fact, if I just start tracking some of the prompts related to influencer marketing inside, Profound or PKI or similar tools, we instantly get to the top 1 or 2 spots simply because we've dominated that space really, really well. And I think about like, there are definitely practices and optimization hacks that you can do for AI search, but then if you just become the go-to answer, right, there's absolutely nothing left for AI search to fight against. When you're just like the default answer for a category, when you think about email marketing and MailChimp is the name that gets into your brain, there's absolutely no way that AI search don't recommend that brand in the top 3. So yeah, so I think right now we're trying to do more of those kind of things. Now, plus some, just to still give away something, we have a ton of free tools. We have programmatic SEO. If you check Modash, I think majority of our traffic comes from either the free tools or the programmatic SEO side of things. The blog contributes a small amount, but it's meaningful. It's still focused on jobs to be done and pain points around our customers. But programmatic SEO is amazing because at this point we have Modash API, which means we have data on like 300, 400 million creator profiles on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And it's not just data on followers. It's so many more things like fake followers, engagement rate, average views, average likes, average comments. So I can create so many free tools completely on my own. I can create programmatic pages, plan them, build their architecture completely on my own. So it's things like, which brand has sponsored which creators. Or, for example, a good one would be if you search for something like find influences in any particular category, any particular niche or location or platform in Google. So, for example, stuff like find category, fitness influencers in California. You're going to see a Modash page ranking because we have thousands of those. And again, it's backed by our own proprietary data. So it's, in my opinion, one of the elitist ways of running a programmatic SEO campaigns I've seen, because it's backed by our own dynamic data, which keeps getting evolved in all of these pages. So it feels pretty good, to be honest, running this SEO and AEO program at this company, because there's just so much that I can play with.
Makes the job easier.
So much
Having a
easier.
great
Like
product and have a great brand.
Yeah, I literally have an AI agent that I've built, which has the API of Modash. So it has like all of the different data points, and then the MCP and AI, also API of Ahrefs to look at keyword opportunities of new tools that we can build or new programmatic pages, because it's going to cross check. So it will say something like, oh, you have this data point on comments, and I see search volume for this keyword called comment analyzer. So maybe you can create a free tool, stuff like that. So it gives you a lot of liberty when you have proprietary data on that scale.
Love that. Love that for you, man. Yeah. Okay. So just to switch gears a bit, not too much, wanted to talk about the studies that you have been running,
Mm.
right? So you run three now. I've had a read of them. They are really great. What prompted you to start conducting original research?
Yeah, I mean, two things I think. One is the fact that I'm just a nerd, to be honest. When it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm just like super interested. Plus, back in the days, like even right now, I think I'm super interested in reading research in general across anything. So, for example, just to give you a non-SEO example, if someone is curious about something medical related, and they're like, oh, does this happen because of this reason or that reason? My instant reaction is, oh, is there a research done on this? Is there, a variety of scientific evidence that I can look at? So I'm a research nerd in that sort of a sense, that I just love reading actual scientific material. Back in the days when I was still just figuring out SEO, I used to read a lot of Google patents, algorithm patents, and just research papers. Literally on weekend, just having coffee in my hand and reading stuff. And this was still before LLMs came, so I would just read stuff and try to figure it out on my own. Read different people's interpretation. Bill Slawski from SEO from the Sea was one of those folks that I was really paying attention to. So at some point, I tried to pull myself out of it just to build more of a marketer's mindset, thinking more about customer psychology and things like that. But I still have a, tools for research. So, yeah, so I think that's number one, my interest in general. And then secondly, I just noticed that I have a lot of questions related to AI search, which I don't have answers to. There's a lot of research around the web. There are still questions in my mind which I simply don't have confident answers about. For example, one of the big ones was the cross agreement of models, right? How many times do they agree with each other? Another one was the probabilistic nature of them. So if I ask the same question, how many times they actually agree, disagree, what's the variance like, and can I quantify all of that? So these two reasons basically just prompted me to say, can I just do some stuff on my own? Because I'm already reading a ton of material coming out from Ahrefs and maybe other companies like Profound. Plus, when you're just interested in the subject, there's so many things that you want to poke a hole in, and you're like, oh, they actually made a mistake here, stuff like that. So I see people running research and then driving the wrong kind of conclusions all the time. So all of these 2 to 3 reasons of feeling like I can do a good job, I'm interested in it, and I have a couple of questions that I want to find the answers to for myself. Plus, if I do, I'll share it with the rest of the world. So I just said, I'm gonna start doing some of this on my own. It takes a lot of work for sure, but it still satisfies the needs at the end of the day.
Would you say that you have been successful in answering some of these questions, or has it just led to more questions?
Really good question. I think it's both. The more you know, the more you feel like you don't know. So um, I have a Google Doc where I have a bunch of questions literally noted that I want to find the answers to, and that prompts the research. And every time I complete a research, I just add 3 to 4 more ideas into it. So it's pretty much true, exactly what you said. Um, if I just know, like, hey, this is how it works, it just lays down 3 to 4 additional questions. And one thing is, I try not to drive conclusions which are not super obvious. So even if you read some of the material, you would not see from me like, hey, this is, based on this research, this is how you should optimize for AI search. All I'm saying is, hey, I've run this research, this is a these are the findings, and then I would let you interpret them, and drive your own conclusions about what you should do. So, for example, if I'm saying, if I ran a research where we asked the same prompt to a bunch of LLMs thousands of times, and what we noticed was that Claude happens to be sticking with the top 1 or 2 industry authority leaders almost all the time. So if you are optimizing for a model like Claude, it's pretty hard to, let's say you're in the screen recording world, you will always see Loom at number 1 or number 2 spot, and it's pretty hard to get Loom out of that ranking spot inside Claude if it's a set of recommendations that it's throwing at you. So if you're a small company like Tela, for example, maybe trying to work inside a model like Claude and trying to gain the number one or number two ranking position is not going to be a realistic goal, at least for now. So again, I wouldn't throw this kind of a conclusion into the research itself as a strategy. I would just say, hey, this is what I've found, and I'll let you drive conclusions out of it. So yeah, but it definitely leads to more questions for sure.
What would you say, is the biggest finding that you have found in all three of your studies? If you had to pick a single one,
Great question.
I'll make it easy for you. Two to three.
Yeah. I think the big one was definitely how what was the variance between models. So for example, when we came up with a set of prompts and asked the same set of prompts to 4 different models, we tried to add some level of variance, as in it's not just one industry, we're actually doing it for 3 industries: project management, email marketing, and video recording or video editing. And then we came up with the 3 to 4 set of prompts and then asked those to 4 different LLMs thousands of times. I had a theory that most likely whatever Rand Fishkin noticed in his own study, which was similar. It was just like, he was, instead of using APIs, he actually asked 600 people to run the same exact query inside LLMs, and then he tried to quantify and check the agreement of models. I had a theory that it will somehow resonate with that data. I intentionally did not read his study before completing mine, just so there's no bias involved. And at the end of the day, when I completed it, I published, and then that's when I checked the research published by Rand. And I think there was a paragraph where he said something similar. He was like, I haven't run this using APIs, but if you run APIs and you do a similar analysis, I have a feeling that you will reach a similar conclusion. And I found a lot of similarities. So if you literally just compare the 2 studies, it's pretty much the same thing. So in my opinion, the finding it was that sure, there's variance if you ask an LLM a question because it can look at your past history. But if you just ask the same exact question so many different times, then the level of variance and the agreement between models might be somewhere similar along the lines between API and you asking it a question manually. So I think like that was a big one. And then secondly, the one that I just published this week was about topical authority. So that was something that I was really interested in, and I noticed the same thing. I thought Gemini would be super similar to Google. Or maybe at least relatively more similar in terms of ranking or valuing specific domains on a topical authority context compared to other LLMs. But Gemini was the least like Google, and Perplexity was the most like Google in terms of valuing the companies who happen to have the most content around certain topic clusters. So that was again a pretty big finding. It was like I didn't expect that. So yeah, I would say those 2 things.
And you mentioned something about letting users interpret the findings. I think a lot of what these studies do incorrectly is that they would do it on a small scale, because even if they're doing it on millions of keywords, Google literally processes what, trillions of queries per day. So that is still a very small sample. And then even if they don't term it as the truth, and all encompassing truth, a lot of the people that are reading that do read that, and then they jump to these conclusions that there's this study, it says this, we need to do this, otherwise we won't see the right type of results.
Yeah,
So
I think to be
that
honest,
caveat.
yeah, I have a slightly different view. I think the magnitude of the study, as in the number of variables that you're studying, let it be a number of keywords or whatever, um, could definitely be a component. But I think the main problem is in fact outside of it, which is that number one, they don't simply narrow the scope, so they would try to find a ton of answers at the same time. So, for example, this topical authority study, if you read it, I explicitly said that hey, this is about B2B software companies. I'm not claiming this works across the board. So you have to narrow the scope because you simply cannot control so many variables at the same time. So at some point you're definitely trying to reach a conclusion because you already have in your mind. It's like the narrative fallacy. And plus, if anyone has read Nassim Taleb's work, you will understand how you have so many narratives in your own mind. And when you try to look at some sort of evidence, any kind of evidence, your brain will try to pull you towards evidence that actually um, correlates with what you already have in your mind, right? So it's like just you and your narrative fallacy in your mind trying to corroborate and just manipulate evidence so that you can reach the conclusion that you wanted to reach. So I'm trying to fight that sort of an instinct. Plus, at the same time, I feel like um, when I say companies are driving the wrong conclusion, it's like, why do you have to force a conclusion? So, for example, if you read some people's LinkedIn content, right? I won't name the person, and there are many people. I'm not talking about a single person here, but they would be like, "Hey, Reddit saw a massive increase in visibility, and this is why we think it happened." And then they would be like, "Hey, it happened because we think people love conversational content and authentic content and stuff like that. So what you should do, you should actually go ahead and add some unique SME insights so that it's actually authentic, and it's not just coming from your marketing team." um, and it's like, it's so crazy, because if you say it happened because of Reddit's authentic content, then Quora's content is also equally authentic. But the same time Reddit blew up, Quora went down. So it's like, you can drive whatever conclusion you want. So some people will literally, I remember a post where someone was talking about Reddit, and he was like, I think it happened because now people want straight answers, they don't want depth. And any company that is still creating those massive guides will definitely lose, because this is what Google now rewards. Like a massive statement, right? Because then you can say, oh, so if we follow that logic, Wikipedia should be losing a lot of traffic, right? But that's not happening. So it's again like, people are just trying to reach a conclusion, like literally expanding their hands and saying, I want to reach this conclusion, what's the evidence that supports this specifically, and then creating a story around it. So that's what I want to go against, to be honest.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. And you wouldn't have the chance to conduct these studies, or probably wouldn't have the chance if you were still in an agency role. What with all the calls and all the workload? Just saying.
Yeah, no, to be honest, like, and by the way, for everyone listening, if you see a lot of stuff coming from my side, I don't necessarily have a very amazing sort of a social life either, just so you know. So like, I am glued to my laptop most of the time. It is what it is. I just love doing this, so I do it. So yeah, you don't have to look at me and say, oh, he's doing a lot, most likely there's a secret. There's not.
I mean, yeah, again, it changes with every person, his
Yeah.
workload, his social life and everything. There's this cool triangle thing where you have, I think, sleep on one end, social life on the other, and work on the third. And there's this
Mm.
rule that you can only balance two of them at the same time. And
Yeah.
anymore, it just breaks.
Very much accurate. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much it.
Nice. So, yeah, I think we've mostly covered a lot of what I wanted to discuss. There is just one thing that I am personally interested in, apart from these different things, which I think a lot of the people would be interested in because they're so relevant to what the industry is doing right now, where SEO is going. One thing that I am personally interested in is the SEO consulting side of things. So, you
Hmm.
got into consulting a long time ago, right? Right when you were working in an agency. How did you make that shift, and how did you land your first few clients?
So I think I mainly wanted to get into it because I saw a set of companies who didn't want to hire an agency. They wanted someone to just be the brain of the strategy. Either they had an in-house team to execute, or maybe a set of freelancers that they're working with. So there's a specific segment of the market who does not want to spend a ton of money, but they still want someone to lead the strategy and make decisions on a high level. So that's the kind of companies I started working with initially, and right now it's changing, of course, because of AI. Because now it looks like I can also help with some of the execution stuff using some of the agents that I've built, so which is cool. But yeah, that was initially what prompted me to jump into it. And then in terms of client acquisition, to be honest, majority of it was just inbound. I didn't do a ton at the start when I first got into it. It just happened because some people reached out and they were like, "Hey, we don't want to hire the company that you work at, but do you have capacity, and we would love for you to be more of fractional head of SEO or something like that. So, and we have a team, and we just want you to build a strategy for us, and then work with us on a consulting basis." But then later on, I think when I got into more momentum, at some point I did use a couple of other things. For example, I think I relied on some, I wanted to test it, just to see if it works. It was using cold emails. Perhaps this was back in 2022, 2023. So still early. But at that point, I think I just reached out to a couple of businesses, very targeted, and approach was pretty simple. I just said like, hey, I have some success stories in this industry or a set of industries, so I'm just going to reach out to other businesses who happen to have adjacent sort of businesses. So if it's like in email marketing, who know about this company that I've worked with and created a case study out of it, I'm just going to reach out to them and say, hey, it's pretty much the same thing that Sam does all the time, right? At Breaking B2B, which is like, hey, I've helped this company grow. Do you want similar growth? They're in your space and stuff like that. And I feel like when you just make the evidence of success super clear, when you just say, hey, look at the screenshot, literally it's growth that I've driven, there's absolutely no way for them to deny the value that you can bring. So I think at some point I did rely on some of the cold emails, and it was pretty good. I think I just did like 15 total, and that landed me like 2 to 3 clients. Yeah, and then at this point, again in 2025, 2026, pretty much it has been based on referrals from other people, or maybe LinkedIn just being a channel, because that's where I'm the most active. Yeah, it's again like a set of companies who feel like they need someone to make decisions and just be the brain of the operation while someone else can execute.
Makes sense. Did you have your own website or Upwork, Fiverr, that type of
No,
platforms?
I was never on
Uh,
Fiverr or Upwork. I think at some point, if I'm not wrong, I wanted to register a bank account. This was still like, and living in third world countries like Pakistan, you understand. This was super early when most of the banking system still didn't recognize people working on a freelance basis. So, and plus, when I say freelance, even if I was working full time, I was a contractor on paper, right? So technically, it was still freelance. So that's when I think I created maybe a profile on Upwork, just to fake it up and say, hey, look, I'm using this platform, because they wouldn't understand that I'm actually acquiring clients directly. But yeah, I never relied on any of these platforms. Many people do. Some of my friends are pretty active, but it's just a channel that I never explored. LinkedIn works well for me, so I'm sticking with it. Now I'm trying to expand into YouTube, by the way. So, but yeah, none of these channels, these platforms were um, something that I relied on at the start.
got
Plus,
it,
to be
got
to
it.
be honest, and maybe again, like it might be different for every people. Like people do whatever they want, but I have a feeling that on these platforms, there's a like you are reaching out to people, or people are coming to you because they want a commodity. You cannot necessarily build a brand, a personal brand or a business brand on these platforms for the most part. I'm pretty sure people are killing it on these platforms too, right? There are exceptions to the rule always, but generally speaking, for example, if I'm on LinkedIn and someone gets in touch, they want to work with me. They don't just want to work with any SEO consultant. And pretty much the same thing with anyone who gets leads inbound, right? When anyone reaches out to a company, intent is to work with that company, not just with any SEO agency for the most part. So and that's what makes it easy in general, because I attract the right kind of companies that I want to work with, where I don't want a lot of stress. I want focus on the work rather than meeting every week. I can charge the amount of money that I want to charge. Um, I can structure things however I like. I can build this. So there's no hard requirement like, hey, we need these things X amount of times every single week. It's more like, this is the goal. This is what we want. This is where we want to get in the next few months. And we want someone to completely take charge of the strategy. So, and I feel like an inbound channel is the best for those kind of things compared to, for example, a freelance platform.
Definitely. Yeah. Agreed on that. Inbound definitely beats outbound and all the applications that you're performing on these channels. Also considering the fact that how competitive all of these channels have gotten.
Yeah, and plus I would just add, if you just find the right inbound mix where you can actually build a system, um, you will just like find so much commercial value, even if you're not using a platforms like Fiverr or Upwork. People will come in inbound. Plus, those kind of companies, they really want to work with you. They will stay longer. They'll be easy to work with. They will be easy to close. So literally, the number of emails that I had to exchange with outbound, that I acquired back in, I think, 2020 to 2023 versus the ones that I work with now. Let's say if there's a referral that came in, I can literally see the number of emails that I had to exchange before I finally close them. And that's like a massive, massive difference. The timeline is huge. It might take like 2 months in some cases for inbound, as low as maybe 1 week. So it's totally crazy. Plus, you can find your ICP, which again means things just get easier. You get the amount of money that you want. I think right now, for example, two companies that I'm working with um, on a consulting basis, both have been roughly around a client of mine for about, I think, 2 years, if I'm not wrong. So it's like 1.5 years, 2 years. That's like typically the range. I think the two other companies that I wrapped up a project with was like 14 months, 15 months. So again, when you just find the right company to work with and they came inbound in the first place, everything just smoothens up later on.
That's really interesting. So, just at a high level, what goes into your consulting work? For example, when you're working with a business that you have been working with for 2 years now,
Yeah.
assuming that you achieved most of the objectives that you set out
Yeah.
for them in the mid of the engagement, perhaps into 10 or 11 months. So, what continues that engagement forward to such a big time period?
For the most part, they just want more growth. So I think, for example, right now the two companies that I'm currently working with, the ones that I just gave the example of, one is a Series A, if I'm not wrong, and they're doing somewhere around 20 million in ARR, and the other one is a massive enterprise. So they're like, I think about like $10 billion in valuation or something like that. So like, they make a lot of money. So it's a massive organization, and that's
I
where
know
they
which
want
one.
someone.
I know which one. I've seen your bio
Yeah, yeah.
for
Oh
my
yeah, cool.
research, but I won't name it.
Yeah, yeah, cool,
So
cool.
just for those who listening to it, yeah,
Yeah,
I know
you
which
can
one he's
check.
talking about.
You can check on your own if you
Yeah,
folks are interested. But yeah, those companies have very different dynamics. The large enterprises, they want someone to be in charge of making decisions and leading the program forward. And of course, that's where things get a little blurry. Like they have a massive objective from the company, then we have to interpret it down to marketing it as at large, and then it comes down to search, and that's where we have a specific goal to move towards. Plus, for larger companies, it just changes all the time, right? Because some CMO will make a decision and they will, just like lead to a different direction, and then every piece of strategy needs to be adapted to their requirements. For smaller companies, it's way more easier. For example, one of my recent clients was cold IQ, which is like, this company in the cold email space, automation space. Right?
big player there.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah, yeah.
outbound.
So in fact, like, I just wrapped up their case study. Should be posting about it in a few months, not months, so few days or weeks. So for those kind of companies, it's pretty straightforward. It's like, hey, we want to get to this level. If we get there, we just move the goalpost. We want to constantly grow. So yeah, so I think for Core IQ, it was pretty good. Started, I think, when they were doing roughly around 2.5 million in ARR, and then we wrapped up the project when the company as a whole, of course, it was not just SEO. They were doing a ton of things outside of it, but the company as a whole grew to about 6.5. And from organic search, we, I think, did maybe like 170% growth in organic search meetings booked, and stuff like that. So it was pretty successful. So it feels like smaller companies have more specific goals to move towards, and they don't make tweaks all the time. For larger companies, of course, it's like you change the strategy based on one executive's decision of about where the company should be moving. Um, yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, I would love to keep you on here for longer because I have 10 more questions. But yeah, was really fun having you, Usman. This was a great discussion, very insightful, and I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching this will find it insightful.
Oh, for sure. Thanks so much, Junaid. I love the conversation. And again, I love seeing what you do as well. So yeah, I really appreciate you um, inviting me here.
Thanks for the words. Thanks for the words. So yeah, just to wrap up, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, anyone who's watching this, what's the best way to do that?
Um, I would say LinkedIn is the best place to reach out. I'm the most active there. Um, you can, get in touch, say hi. Plus, I have recently also started putting out more content on YouTube in case you're interested. So yeah, those would be the two places. But if you want to say hi, get in touch, LinkedIn is the best place to reach out.
You heard that, folks. LinkedIn and YouTube. Go follow him right now as soon as this video ends. Thanks again, Osman.
I
See you
appreciate it,
soon.
man.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Okay.